Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Susan Rosney, and you are watching Difference Makers Discuss from Chartered Accountants Worldwide. It is wonderful to see how many people have joined us today from around the world. We've over 2,400 attendees from over 80 countries watching. This is the third episode in this web series from Chartered Accountants Worldwide. Throughout the series, we'll be looking at some of the most pressing issues affecting chartered accountants and the business and finance sector more broadly. From diversity and inclusion to mental health, from trusted business to digital disruption and the climate emergency, we'll take an unflinching look at what's happening in our industry and how we can work together to make a difference. To help us navigate these topics, we'll be hearing from people who have worked to transform communities, businesses, and the wider world, making a real difference in the lives of others. We call them difference makers. In this episode, our difference makers will be discussing sustainability. We know that climate change will have a devastating impact on humanity and on biodiversity, but it will also have a massive impact on economies. According to Swiss Re Research Institute, climate change will account for a loss to global economic input of $23 trillion by the year 2050. We also know that sustainability disclosure requirements are fast becoming the norm around the world. But being a chartered accountant goes beyond reporting. It means being responsible for driving change, and we're all agents of change and accountability. So today, I'm joined by three speakers who are working on the front line of sustainability in business. They're all chartered accountants, and they all connect stakeholders to sustainability issues and drive positive change within organizations. They're all difference makers in the truest sense of the term. However, before I introduce them, we've some housekeeping notes to run through. For those of you having any issues with bandwidth, you can lower the resolution of the stream so you can see us better. This is done via the settings wheel at the bottom right of the video screen. We'll be having a round table discussion at the end of the show, which I'm very much looking forward to. Please post your questions in the field beside the video. We'll also be asking poll questions throughout the webinar. Please answer these. They promise to be very useful and informative. And also use the chat function to comment during the sessions. We'd love to hear from you. So just before we get into this discussion, we're going to ask the first poll question. Which of these options, sustainability strategy? We have a strategy, but compliance is low. We have a strategy that's supported by the working to improve our sustainability. I'm going to give a few moments so more people can answer. So it looks like totally broken up. Okay. If everyone could bear with me, it looks like I'm having some trouble with sound. And our wonderful team in Big Top Multimedia is just working with me on that now. So I'll give a few more minutes to our team. Lovely. I think it seems to be fixed now. Great. All fine. I love technology. So I'm going to come back to this poll question, and it looks like top of the list is we're always seeking to improve our sustainability. So I'm hoping we will have some excellent tips from our speakers today to help people in the sustainability journey. We really want to keep this conversation going, and we encourage you to share your favorite quotes or moments from this event on social media by adding the hashtag difference makers and tagging us in your posts so we can continue this conversation. And those social media handles are coming up on the screen now. Next thing, we're delighted to let you know about Chartered Accountants Worldwide's new Sustainability Hub, where you can find resources to help make you, your organisation and your clients as sustainably responsible as possible.
Everyone is responsible for sustainability. All chartered accountants are agents of change and of accountability, which is why we've been working hard to bring you a brand new Chartered Accountants Worldwide Sustainability Hub. In this hub, we've pulled together a wealth of content from our member institutes and trusted partners around the world. It's here to help you and the businesses that you either support or you work for to become more sustainable and resilient now and in the future. It's time to make a difference and help the world towards a more sustainable and resilient future.
As you saw from the video, you can find this hub on the Chartered Accountants Worldwide website. Look for the Sustainability tab. Now, I'd like to welcome our first guest. Our first guest is Frances Carter. Frances is Operations Director from Conservation Capital, where she works on a range of conservation area business planning and innovative financing projects across Africa, Asia, and South America. Frances is also subject matter expert on corporate sustainable development, sustainability reporting, and carbon management, including organizational and project level carbon offset strategies. Frances, you are very welcome to Difference Makers Discuss.
Hi, Susan. Thanks for having me.
Frances, your organisation, the Conservation Capital, that is aiming to bring private capital into the conservation world. Would you tell us a little bit more about that and how you got involved?
Yeah, so there's clearly a deficit in funding in conservation and biodiversity. Mainly protected areas are funded by governments or through donor models. And there is a massive gap in funding, and we can see that in the results. We're in what they call a sixth extinction phase. We're losing huge amounts of land through deforestation and biodiversity loss, water pollution, plastics pollution. So what Conservation Capital does is to bridge that gap between capital financing and financial services, or the private sector, into what you can call natural capital, or these natural assets. So basically protecting these large areas of land and maintaining their conservation and biodiversity value. And how I got into it was really, I was working in financial services, and I noticed that really if you can control or guide where the money goes, you can create great change. And there was a huge gap in the market where, and there still is, where the private sector is looking to invest in these conservation projects, but they just don't know how to. And the carbon market has filled that gap somewhat, and there's still a way to go with the target on biodiversity and other areas of nature. But I was trying to see how could I marry my passion for conservation and travel with my chartered accountancy background and financial services expertise.
So you mentioned that about the almost like a dearth of projects that are available for organizations who want to invest. And so that's something obviously that Conservation Capital is aiming to resolve in a way. It's trying, you can't solve it, it's huge, but we're just trying to offer an outlet where people can maybe match an ESG target to a project. Would that be correct?
Yeah, SDG, also your sustainability of your supply chains, resilience of assets that could be threatened by climate change risks, such as what we're seeing in Australia with flooding or fires or drought, whatever may be happening in the different regions. So one of the areas we work in is engaging corporations on their sustainable development model and linking those investments they could make into natural capital, whether it's wetlands or soil health or whatever it may be, where you're creating leverage, and you're basically de-risking the natural assets and the investment in the natural asset for that capital to come in. So the key is to find alignment. With SDGs, companies will list certain SDGs they're focusing on, and that's the umbrella. And then it goes into how do companies invest in that natural capital, not through CSR, but through, instead of giving a donation, it could be through a bond, and that reduces the cost of capital for the company. It also creates an investment, particularly in an area where they have a supply chain issue, or they have assets that may have a resilience issue. So it just links those two together.
And funny, you mentioned bonds there. Is that the green bonds that we hear a lot about?
It could be green bonds. We call them corporate conservation bonds. Mm-hmm. So Conservation Capital launched in partnership with the London Zoological Society and other partners, the first conservation bond in the world, which was the Rhino Conservation Bond. And that's the first performance-based bond in the world that's linked to a conservation outcome. And the outcome is increased rhino numbers in key areas in Africa. And that's one area. Instead of doing a donor model, you link it to bonds. But for corporations, it links back to the resilience of their supply chains, where they rely on that natural capital. Mm-hmm. And some in their ESG issues with provenance of supplies and modern slavery issues, fashion industry, particularly with agriculture and animal welfare and land management practices. So it sort of feeds into everything. Basically, when companies rely on natural capital, they need to invest in that natural capital.
So you mentioned natural capital several times there, and
yeah.
I know from your research that there are 6 capitals that
yes.
people are aware of. Would you mind just going into that in some detail?
Yeah, so this is where the slides, please. This will help illustrate what we're talking about. Are they up? Are you able to tell me? Okay, so I might share my screen if that's okay, then because I can see it then. So when you have a sustainable business model, this is where sustainability is embedded in the business model. And it shows that there's not a segregation between economic health of a business and ESG or sustainability of business. The economic health is inbuilt in the sustainability. And I'll just draw your attention to the right, the value creation, and that's where the 6 capitals are. And this is where chartered accountants really come in, is that we can no longer just value capital based on the financial capital or the infrastructure. There are 6 capitals: manufactured, nature, social, human, and intellectual. And this basically breaks it down to give you an idea of what these are. So it's more what I would call in sort of geopolitically forecasting for the company of what will impact the company now and in the future. What investments are you going to make that will impact the company inwardly, and what does the company have an impact on externally? And that's where you can see natural capital comes in, where companies rely on water supply, or they rely on pollination services with agriculture, or they rely on soil health, or as I said, with fashion industry, with animal welfare and animal standards, but also land management practices, and also water with fashion as well. That's a big one. That's the same with also FMCGs, coffee, cocoa, all this, they all rely on natural capital, but they also rely on human capital, social capital. So this is where accountants need to start thinking broader, outside the box of let's do a retrospective look and then forecasting just on the financial numbers.
That's very interesting. And I've got a really interesting question that came in. It was an example of natural capital that organizations would rely on. And it looks like you've answered that, especially with even water alone. It's something that it's an abundant resource we take for granted, but a supply of clean water is going to be extremely important for almost all companies, and there are certain sectors where it's more important than others. But soil health is another which impacts absolutely everyone. And it was brought home to me recently when someone described there being a certain number of feet or meters of soil all around the world that we depend on for absolutely everything. And it's not something that would be thought of by businesses on a day-to-day basis unless you're in agriculture or in an agri-food business or another business that relies heavily on it. But when you step back from it and look at it, it does affect everybody. And chartered accountants, kind of being agents of change, being communicators, are going to possibly need to expand the kind of capitals that they would have measured in the past to incorporate all of these six, which actually leads into a poll question that we also have, which is, does your organization measure these capitals? And we have some answers there, which are yes, all of them, some of them, none of them, or that you might not know, which is, it's an interesting to get an idea of how attendees on the call are already familiar with the six capitals, or is it something that will be coming as news? Because I think most of us would obviously know about intellectual capital, financial, and human resources, as it's often known, is something obviously that most people be aware of, but the social and the natural might be relatively new. So I'm just going to go to the answers on the Slido. And some of them seems to be the question that has had the most impact, but actually maybe 15% of respondents are saying that they would measure all of them, which is interesting. But I think some of them, now none of them is the second highest. So that's interesting as well. But I think it's an area, do you see, Frances, as becoming more and more relevant now, and maybe coming into the discourse of chartered accountants with greater frequency, the topic of the six capitals?
I think it definitely is, particularly as we see companies looking at from a physical risk of climate change, stranded assets happening, or water quality is dropping, or water security is definitely an issue in some areas. Pollination services for agriculture is definitely an issue that's coming up in soil health. So it's also with fisheries, with mangroves being nurseries and the destruction of mangroves, fish supplies rely on mangroves. If we don't have mangroves, we don't have seafood. So they're ecosystem services that no one is paying for, that companies are not paying for, and they need to pay for it, and therefore they need to measure it. And a great example of where these capitals are not measured properly in accounting is our human capital. Employees are your biggest asset for a company, and we have them as an expense on the books. They go through as an expense on P&L. They're not seen as an asset. And that's exactly where there's a misalignment with traditional accounting and actually what the company relies on and produces.
I don't know why I laughed there, but I think it was more thinking that is how I am perceived now as an employee, that we are all costs as opposed to resources. So it's almost like a fundamental shift in how we look at these things and how we value them. And you mentioned mangroves and the seafood population. Another example that occurred to me as you were talking was the semiconductor issue that struck the market last year and the year before, where severe droughts in Taiwan caused a water shortage. So there wasn't enough water that was required by the extremely kind of thirsty semiconductor industry, which then had a knock-on effect on supply chains around the world and hit the car industry, for instance. So although when we think of these issues, we tend to think of them as outside of the business box. But when you actually break it down, it's very much something that will hit businesses around the world. And supply chain is possibly the most obvious example outside of health.
And that's why I call it geopolitical forecasting. That's what I'm doing all the time. Is that what's the story of these numbers? Where are the investments going? Is it going to be a political sustainability issue? Is it going to be an environmental sustainability issue, or a social one, or a combination of all of them? That in the end will lead to an economic issue for that company. And we have seen multiple examples of that, where companies that are financially sound have nearly or have collapsed because of these non-financial issues, or not measuring the capital properly, and the risk attached to those and opportunities that are missed.
Yes, and a final thought that occurred to me. I was at a conference on Monday where we had a speaker on kind of global peace design, talking about the issues now in Africa with a lot of the clean energy minerals, or minerals associated with the products that are required for clean energy, being the, I don't want to say, and to be too dramatic about it, but certainly being the topic of great interest with various potentially aggressive parties, and how that is going to impact on production of those. I've just had a message there to say, because obviously I could talk about this for a long time. I'm fascinated by this topic, and it's wonderful to talk to you, Frances, but luckily I've got a great team behind me who are able to say, Susan, you must move on now. So I will do. Frances, you're going to stay for the roundtable discussion at the end. So thank you so much again for that. And the slides that you shared will be available to attendees after this event. But I'm going to move on now to our second speaker. And we are joined now by Yin Xian Go. And Jan is the Group Finance Director of Goodpack Group, a strong advocate of sustainability as well. Jan believes that companies must always be raising the ambition and the targets to achieve ESG goals, and in the importance of all stakeholders adopting a sustainability mindset. Jan, you're very welcome to Difference Makers Discuss.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks for the introduction.
Now, in your previous role, which was at the Tekwa Group, you were the lead in their sustainability report initiative as far back as 2017. Since then, you have seen the finance industry's understanding of sustainability evolve.
Yeah.
What do you feel is the current role of chartered accountants with respect to sustainability?
Okay. Before I start, maybe I give some context. When I started the sustainability journey in 2017, it was basically thrown into the deep end, because at that time I was in Singapore, where I'm from. Listed companies are required to start sustainability reporting at that year when I started. So it was really deer in the headlights moment, trying to figure it out, trying to see what I need to do. But it became more a growth from a compliance perspective to just embracing sustainability as a whole. So my suggestion is that for chartered accountants, right, we are more equipped to do it, because we are traditionally stewards of data. So we look at financial, non-financial data, and try to implement and design it so that it becomes more practical for the users, for the end users. For me in general, right, I became more just reporting my group's performance in sustainability to actually advocating it among the peers. So we looked at trying to cascade it down, not just as an annual reporting process, but looking at a quarterly or management objective process. Because sustainability as a whole, it's not a one man position. It has come up from the whole company. So you try to create that culture among your companies, and being a chartered accountant, you have to be less introvert and more extrovert in regards to this, because it's always fine and dandy to look at financials and stuff, but with sustainability, you have to actually go out there and be more than what is required. So I think that's key. The second part is actually trying to digest what the standards are, because sustainability is such an alphabet soup. I think later, like what Frances just mentioned, there's so much things you can report on, so much things you can look at. How do you gauge the impact of it? So I think for sustainability as a whole, you have to be that type of individual to look at the standards and try to apply it accordingly. And finally, just interpreting data, I guess, because at the end of the day, right, as more companies jump on the sustainability bandwagon and try to be try to show their sustainability impact, their carbon footprint and stuff, you have to actually look at it not just from your own organizations, whether your operations team is saying that they're doing certain things. You have to actually review it, become an independent assurance that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that's what chartered accountants should aspire to be. That's my point of view.
So you've got there's so much going on there, because you have, obviously you've got accountants, as you said, stepping outside of the comfort zone, moving from being very focused maybe on details to having to be communicators to a wider group of people, because sustainability, and we know this from Goal 17 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they collaborate. It's collaboration for the goals. And that can be then interpreted in a business context as needing to talk to so many other actors in organizations, and as well as understanding the regulatory requirements, as well as understanding maybe the standards, obviously, but also the reporting requirements of different stakeholders. And that leads me to our poll question that we should have coming up on the screen now, which is a question about why sustainability is important to organizations. And the various options that we have there are around, say, government regulation. We mentioned their stakeholder demand for sustainability reports, but also pressure from investors who are more aware and possibly are driving the need for sustainability reporting, because that obviously is what's driving the drive for comparable standards globally. But there's a couple of questions, part of that, which is the link, I think, between the enterprise value. So just looking at the poll questions as they're coming in, I wanted to ask you, Hyun, what your thoughts are on the key reasons why companies should be concerned about sustainability.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll share a screen. Let me try to put that up in a moment. Wait. Okay. So this is how companies in Singapore generally look at sustainability targets under ESG. It's quite a wide range with regards to environment, social, governance. But generally, there are so many stakeholders involved. So for companies as a whole, you have to actually look at it from certain perspective. So we look at it from a government regulation point of view. That's why companies are concerned with sustainability. I'm currently in India at the moment for a work trip. So I just found out from my colleagues, right, the Indian government has actually mandated CSR expenditure from companies based on their profit level. So it's very interesting to hear that companies have to spend, profitable companies have to spend, they mandate profitable companies to spend money on CSR initiatives, and also for certain regulations, like for example, I think for Singapore in general, is quite, I wouldn't say it's early in the game of sustainability, but it's always trying to find out what works best in their environment as well. So you've seen countries like Japan, China, which look at sustainability. So the regulation changes quite a bit. It's quite strict in certain countries, but it's always moving. So that's for regulation. For activism as well, I think activism among your employees, your customers, your suppliers, your contractors. In my previous role, we had a lot of suppliers and customers ask us what is our ESG impact before we even come up with a report. And it spurred that thought in us. It's like it spurred the thought in me the most, because I'm thinking that we shouldn't do the report just because it's a compliance issue. We should do a report more to satisfy our customers, our stakeholders, because as sustainability, ESG or sustainability become a worldwide topic or something that people talk about, we should try to feed it as much to show that we are meeting social goals with regards to sustainability and making sure that that's achieved. So
that then feeds out also back into Francis's point that when you talk about staff wanting to get employee engagement, wanting to get to recruit employees, this is a major facet now, a major employee value proposition to prospective candidates, and seeing the employees then as a value as well.
Yep.
I mean, there's so much we can unpack there, and I think we may have to come back to it at the roundtable discussion.
Yes.
And Ken, you're staying with us for that, I understand, which is great. So thank you very much for that. And it's fascinating, and I think we'll come back to the poll questions that arose from this session as well. But I'm going to move on now to our final guest, Belinda Carrera. Belinda, in 2018, founded Well, an employee wellbeing company, as she has a passion for good health and wellbeing and believes that people are an organization's most valuable asset. Belinda co-founded Sustainable SA in 2020, a project now sponsored by the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, SAICA. The project works in collaboration with strategic partners and experts to provide focused monthly updates and education on South Africa's progress towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Belinda also co-founded Sustainable DNA, which is a sustainability solutions business. She's driven to ensure that all businesses incorporate sustainability and climate action into their strategies, and that boards and shareholders receive the timely feedback and insights they need. Belinda recently won the SAICA Chairman's Difference Makers Award for Sustainability in June 2022. And being a passionate lifelong learner, she's currently completing a sustainability and innovation program through MIT. Belinda, it is a great pleasure, but where to begin with all of this? It's just an amazing background. You were focused on people's well-being when you founded Well back in 2018. What made you move towards a wider, more global outlook as you went on? Or was there always a through line with this?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for the very generous introduction, Susan. It's a great pleasure to be on the webinar today with you all. So really it started when I attended a FinBiz 2030 event back in 2019. And Kate Robertson, who is the co-founder of One Young World, was there. And she was speaking about how all of us need to get involved in working together for the greater good. And this really motivated me. Afterwards, a colleague of mine, Damien Judge, who's the CFO of Trellidor, said, let's start off something to help South Africa on its sustainability journey. And so we formed Sustainable South Africa, and we went to the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. We asked them to sponsor the project, and they ended up sponsoring it. And since then, I've been really doing a lot of deep strategy work with my clients, developing sustainability strategies for them, building software tools for them to implement their sustainability strategies. And so I really feel that it's been like a build on from the employee health and well-being business Well, because employees are really the most valuable asset any organization has. And I think this has been a common thread of the webinar already this morning when Francis spoke about people being the most important asset. I was just like, that relates exactly to how I feel and what I think. And also now just recently just chatting about how important employees are in the whole equation. And they fit very well into obviously the social dimension of sustainability. So to me, it really is, yes, it's a broadening of the work that I started in Well on employee health and well-being, and it's just been a natural evolution.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And another evolution would be, say, Sustainable DNA, which is the new organization that you've co-founded. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sure. So thanks for the question. But before I dive in to tell you a little bit more about Sustainable DNA, I'd like to run 5 poll questions. So if we could run the poll questions now, and they're just simple yes or no questions. I'd just like to find out where everyone's at on their journeys in this area. So the first question is, does your organization have a sustainability strategy? And definitely been seeing the polls coming up.
Yeah, mostly yes, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm looking at these on my phone in case. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to get the results straight here. So great. So a big 61% at the moment. No 34%. Wow, these polls are changing all the time, which is so interesting.
It's quite rapid how the polls change.
And I'm so grateful for all our viewers and participants this morning, because I'm getting some great info here and statistics on where people are at around the world. So I think we can stop the poll now. And so what we have got then is, if we close the polls, it's a yes at 58%, a no at 30%, and a don't know at 12%. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question. Does your organization report on sustainability? please jump in and let us know. So this is pretty even. We're having a yes at 50%, a no at 43%. Wow, this is really insightful as well. It's quite amazing to see now yes is at 62%. So it's amazing to see how many organizations actually are already reporting on sustainability without the standards being formalized just yet. Yeah, so I'm going to give it another 1-2 seconds and let's close that poll. So very sort of close result. Here we have a yes, that 52% report on sustainability, or 51% now, and a no at 40%, and a don't know at 9%. So ladies and gentlemen, this is leaving us with great opportunity to really kick off the revolution as chartered accountants to get the reporting score up for reporting on sustainability, because we're left with a no, 40% no. So let's move on to the next question. Does your organization have an innovation platform for sustainability? Does your organization have sustainability key performance indicators? There I am jumping the gun. So this is the KPIs for sustainability. Does your organization have them? Does it measure and track and report on its sustainability journey? Wow, 45%, 45%. Yes, no. Okay, this is moving and changing also quite dynamically. So I'm going to give this another 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's close the poll. So we have that a no at 54%, a yes at 32%. So yes, there are 32% of organizations doing KPIs and tracking sustainability, implementation, and performance, and a no at 54%. So this is another opportunity area for us to address. The next question is, does your organization have an innovation platform for sustainability? So let's look at what we're going to get here.
And how would you define an innovation platform?
And so, Susan, this is something I definitely want to speak to a bit more, and a great question, because innovation is, you can't do things that you haven't done before by not innovating. And going on the sustainability journey, we're going to have to change the way we conduct our business strategies, the key performance indicators that we set. We need to put new projects into the organization to achieve them. And the way to implement those new projects and actually find those new projects, it might be green technology, different, related to water desalination, for example, related to carbon offsets, for example. How are you going to find that is by putting all of these ideas onto an innovation platform. And it's going to help you sift through what you can and what you can't do, and what's going to give you the best financial returns to actually achieve your key performance indicators for sustainability. So that's really how I would look at an innovation platform in relation to sustainability. So here we are, we've closed this poll, and another huge opportunity, and I'm going to share something with you just now as well, which you'll find most insightful. Let's close the poll here. So we have a no at 65%, and we have a don't know about this innovation platform, don't even know that we've got one at 20%, and a yes at 15%. So this is a huge area, once again, for all of us to be involved and start innovating within our organizations, to unpack a little bit just now. And the last poll question I'd like to ask is, have you received training in sustainability that has been arranged by your organization for you? And that's a simple yes or no. So let's go and look at what that response rate is. Wow.
Oh God, a very strong no.
Overwhelming no, yes.
Yeah.
So as chartered accountants that say that chartered accountants can change the world, and I think that this is just showing us how much opportunity there is for us to make a really big difference there by using the skills that we have, adapting them, and helping others to join us on the sustainability journey. So let us close the poll there. And yeah, I think we really see that there's an overwhelming no at 77% that people have not received training on sustainability, and 33% yes that people have. So now, Susan, I want to get back to answering your question about what does sustainable DNA do? And I want to share a slide that I think summarizes it pretty well. Let me go into my, I just want to see where I can share my slide. I don't see that I can share my slide. Sorry, I'm not sure. Oh, sorry. Meeting. I don't know what happened there. Lapse in logic. Okay, let me just share my screen, my slide here. Can everybody
I can see it now? Yeah. I see the
Fantastic.
PowerPoint slide, yeah.
So, right, I just want to show you in brief. So what we do is we help organizations develop their sustainability and climate action strategies. And it's a bit of a journey that we take companies on because it's not something you can do quickly overnight. The journey typically takes 1 year to 3 years. And so we start off by doing a materiality assessment and setting up governance structures, putting proper governance structures in place for organizations. We then look at risks and opportunities. We develop a sustainability framework for our clients. And we set up an EESG scorecard, which is the economic, environment, social, and governance, which is what Frances also alluded to earlier when she said sustainability includes all the economic impacts. We can't only really be looking at ESG because economic impacts are massive and we need to take those into consideration. Stakeholder engagement, absolutely key to this journey. So we do that communication plan. We actively engage with organization stakeholders to bring them on the journey, find out what their concerns are. We develop strategic plans, we implement on the strategy, and we help clients with their net zero transition pathways. We've got a carbon calculator, we help with all those calculations. We set up the innovation platforms and help to generate, generate those projects. And of course, continuously reviewing and improving the process. So I think basically what sums up the ethos of the company and, is that you can't manage what you can't measure. And so, it's got to be informed, measured, reported on, and rewarded in the REM structure for it to be effective. And we can't do this because there's so much data to gather around the organization that we use software tools as a key implementation, with us, assisting us with our implementation. So that's really what Sustainable DNA does.
That is fantastic. And actually on the previous slide, it reminded me to mention that what you described there is, say, almost like a roadmap to sustainability, the paths that people have to take. And as part of the Sustainability Hub that Chartered Accountants Worldwide is launching today, there's a roadmap to sustainability for Chartered Accountants. So I'd urge people who are on the call to go into charteredaccountants.worldwide.com, look at that hub and look at the roadmap that's there, because Belinda, obviously you also contributed to the creation of that roadmap, and it's extremely useful. It's very useful to people to plot in another kind of direction, to plot what you have described there. But all of this has been incredible, Belinda. Thank you so much. And you're going to stay with us for the group discussion, which is actually going to take place just after the next poll question that we have. And Gert, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the next poll question, I'm just going to read that out. And that is a question that's very straight to the point of this session today, which is how good is your organization at communicating its sustainability goals? So communicating the aspirations that it has in a sustainability or economic social governance, as it's often referred to in the financial context. So of the very good, could do better, and they don't communicate them, right now it seems to be could do better is the top of the list. And I think that's something that all companies possibly would find, although there's a small percentage that say that it's very good. I think definitely communicating is something that maybe speaks again to what Jan was saying, which is the need for people who are maybe having to move outside of their comfort zones, having to talk to people outside of a silo that they may have been in up to this point, because communicating sustainability is extremely important, and it's maybe in the process of communicating that, or the requirement to communicate, is when you find yourself gathering the data and talking to lots of people around the organization. And it's maybe where chartered accountants as well are, they're the nexus of financial information in an organization. So it's communicating that, telling that story through the numbers is something, and we have half of the poll respondents saying could do better is how they're finding their organization. So now it is time for our roundtable discussion. And I'm delighted to welcome back our three brilliant speakers to discuss these issues and to answer your questions over the next 10 minutes. I'm going to loop back to the poll we took in a minute, but I have so many questions that have come in that I'd love to get to a few of those rather than that. So on my screen right now, I still have the poll. Bear with me here. And I have a question here for Belinda, which is, how do we get involved, especially on the assurance side? And this is a question that is extremely pertinent, obviously, to accountants. So Belinda, would you be able to take that question? How do chartered accountants get involved?
Certainly. So thank you for the question. Thank you, Susan. So I think on the assurance side, it's such a broad topic that you need to find an area that you're passionate about. Is it going to be on the environmental side? And then which particular environmental area would you want to focus on? Because we've looked at this before and we've realized that we can't do everything all at once, but we can do everything over a period of time. So maybe if you start looking at assurance over, for example, scope 1, 2, and 3, so you could look at how do we assure that, like how do the calculations get performed? There's ISO standards, and those are quality certification standards, and it's good to go on training of those ISO standards and to then apply those and speak to other specialists in that area and also do benchmarking with other companies. So what I would suggest is that you decide which sustainability area you want to start looking at doing assurance for, and then focus on specific KPIs and start developing assurance models for each KPI based on the international standards that address each of those KPIs. Because everyone, this is such an amazing opportunity. We have to start developing these assurance models ourselves today. And I can tell you something now, $1 billion has been poured in by KPMG and by, I think, Deloitte that I've seen into this area. So big opportunity for us all to contribute to our organizations and start getting involved into this assurance process and take it one step at a time. Thank you, Susan.
Absolutely. Thank you, Belinda. Francis, could I bring you back in on that particular question as well? I think there's two parts of it. One was how chartered accountants can be involved, but also the second part was on the assurance issue.
So just building on from what Belinda said, an easier way to actually target where you want your assurance is you do a materiality assessment, and that will determine the key areas that your company has risks and opportunities in based on a stakeholder engagement. So you will highlight in that area materiality areas, whether it is environmental, your carbon decarbonisation strategy, it could be diversity in the workplace, it could be anything that actually your company has an impact on and that impacts the company as well. And then you do a risk assessment on those areas that are key in that materiality matrix, and you will assign KPIs and what we also call KPNs, key performance narratives, that are attached to those KPIs. And that actually gives the context of what the KPI is trying to achieve. And the nuance around that, because you are talking about non-financial factors here. And so for assurance, that will help target that insurance, as Belinda said. You want to target it in areas that are high impact, that are material, where you want to make sure, number one, you're reporting correctly and you're actually doing what you're saying you're doing. Where chartered accountants can become involved is really in measuring those KPIs and KPNs and making sure they're tracking properly, you understand them, and that they're legitimate targets. And this is where obviously greenwashing is a whole other thing, where you make sure you're not greenwashing the area.
Okay, no, that's fascinating. Thank you very much. And Jan, I might just go to you with a different question because it's one that has come in from our attendees, and it looks like several people are interested in the answer. Could you share how you value or create or add value to your business from the sustainability angle?
Yes, I think there are a few areas. Besides looking at the data, like what Francis said, and having some assurance, reviewing the data to make sure that's correct. It's always challenging the norm because most organizations, when I first started, it was merely basically just a compliance-driven sustainability report or initiative that needs to be done. So it's challenging the norm that to form that culture among organizations, like I said earlier, to actually push it forward, to push the goalposts. Like when we first started, like I give an example, when I first started, we set certain sustainability targets. And as we got more adaptive to hitting those targets, we have to always push that target further down the line, so that you actually have a bigger impact onto society with regards to your sustainable goals, your ESG targets, and actually showing to not all your stakeholders that you're making a difference. That's what's important for adding value to the business. I won't say that you can try to monetize it, because that's quite subjective in a way, but you have to actually show all your stakeholders that you are the forefront of actually pushing the agenda of making sustainability a key driver in all your business meetings, your operations meetings, your team meetings, and even at the board meeting. So it cascades down from top to the bottom. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. I wanted to get to some of the audience questions that actually came in before we began. These are ones that came in as we were promoting the webinar. And we have a question which is really interesting, especially in the context of communications and sustainability and accountants and finance. This was a statement which was, in my opinion, greenwashing is worse than inaction. And is there a future for some kind of sanctions in the investment sphere? So I thought I might ask Belinda for your response and your thoughts on greenwashing and how that is that worse than inaction in your from your perspective.
So thank you very much for the question, Susan. You know, I think we all start off by having to make a statement that is bigger than we are achieving today. And we have to stretch ourselves when we set the KPIs. So for example, a big area for greenwashing is this net zero transition pathway, saying that everyone's going to achieve net zero by the year 2050. Now that's, it's not so far away. And they say that they're going to achieve it by 50% by 2030. So everyone has made this initial statement, and now they need to take action. And the most effective way to take action and for it not to be greenwashing is to follow, for example, the disclosure requirements of the TCFD, because the TCFD brings all the metrics, it brings the scenario analysis, and everything needs to be reported on and reflected. And that way, and we've been speaking about this, you've got to gather the data. Okay, and you've got to gather the data and set a baseline number, and then you've got to set your targets based on the baseline, and you've got to track against the achievement of those targets actually on a monthly basis. And you have to show that you've set strong governance processes up into place. So for me, it starts off with potentially a greenwashing statement made by organizations, and companies got away with that for way too long, seeing as the industry leaders in sustainability by making these statements, because there was no harmonization or standardization of the reporting standards and frameworks around sustainability and climate action. Now we are lucky with the IFRS set up the ISSB last year as a result of COP26. We've got the FRAG that is issuing their standards, and they're hoping to get those off by close of this year. And we've got the SEC in the US that is now requiring formalized disclosures around climate action for their companies to make. So we're seeing this standardization of reporting frameworks coming out. So this is going to help us to stamp out the greenwashing. So, and also it's going to help us to benchmark year on year, because what companies were also doing was they're reporting on the good news one year, and then when things didn't get so good the next year, they got rid of that reporting, and they started focusing on other areas that they're reporting on, which is nonsense. You need consistency, comparability, and that's exactly what S1 and S2 of the ISSB, which is now going through the IFRS, is showing us. And those are, they're looking at all the comments they received. Those are going to come out in Q1 next year. And then we've got the FRAG, which will address all the European countries. And then we've got the SEC looking after the US area. So really glad to see that. And that should help to address a lot of the greenwashing that we're seeing in place. And then, of course, there's the natural capitals protocol that is also coming out. And that will help to address the natural capitals area where there's a lot of greenwashing taking place as well.
Okay. So that's a very kind of a positive maybe perspective on how some of the reporting developments, the standardization of sustainability reporting by the International Sustainable Standards Board under IFRS and then the European and also the American version. So I think there is something there, and certainly a role that chartered accountants can play. I have another question though that came in from Zambia that I wanted to get to as well. And this is a very interesting one, especially in the context of climate justice that we were talking about, Francis, which was how do we address the historical fact that the developed world has already benefited from unfettered carbon emissions. And now the rest of the world must behave according to new rules. And this is something certainly that came out very strongly at COP26 last year in Glasgow. And we look with interest to COP27 in Egypt. So Frances, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we need to divide this into two areas. The developed world and including China are obviously responsible for the majority of greenhouse gas emissions and the crisis we're facing. But it's actually not just vulnerable communities that are affected by climate change. It is the latitudes at 30 degrees on either side, your tropical Cancer and Capricorn, they're going to be the most hit, and your low-lying island areas, and that's backed up by science. So you have countries like the US, like Australia, but also developing countries that are going to be hit as well. Where you have the inequality is the ability to respond to these climate issues. So I think it's a very tough question. Yeah. The Article 6 in the Paris Agreement, which allows states to buy offsets from other sovereign nations when they're not going to meet the net zero targets, is sort of it's sort of like an addition to aid that's coming in, and I can see that with my carbon projects in East Africa and in Asia, where they have co-benefits attached to support communities, and they all have to have climate resilience mitigation and adaptation attached to them. You cannot do a project anyway, or a carbon project that does not have a climate benefit attached to it for communities. But unless, it's a tough one, unless developed countries like Australia, and I'll speak for Australia because I'm Australian, actually step up and do something about it. This is a global issue. We're going to sit at 2030 as the cliff. The carbon budget is up at 2030. After that, it's non-reversible. So it really is going to be, I don't have the answer for that, but it's going to be using Article 6 to support developing countries in these biodiversity and carbon projects and community projects that really on the ground will have an impact. And that's where I have my expertise. I can't really comment on other areas of infrastructure or sure. Public health or anything else, but from the natural capital point of view of supporting those natural capital assets, the developing countries definitely through Article 6 can help, in addition to actually doing something about cutting their emissions other than just using offsets.
And actually, that's the last question I have time for, is the question on offsets. I know they have had a lot of negative publicity with maybe too many companies trying to benefit from offsets as a way of just continuing business as usual. And that's something that also has been said to feed into inequality, and phrases like I think it was offset colonialism, as a carbon colonialism was coming in on that one as well. I don't know, Belinda, do you have anything to say on the thorny issue of offsets?
Look, Susan, I think it is a pretty thorny issue. And, this carbon colonialism is proving to have a negative impact on local inhabitants. Things such as land grabs, food insecurity, and the destruction of communities being the side effects in the fight against climate change as people clear large land masses to replant trees and the likes. And, in a 2011 study by Oxfam, they estimated that at least 22,500 people were evicted from their homes in the creation of timber plantations in Uganda, and that the UK registered New Forest Company, just to generate carbon offsets. So for me, it is a thorny subject, is that we need to, do everything, it needs to be like a circular economy principles. You can't do one without the other. So when we're looking after our natural resources, we have to look at the impact it's having on communities and where they are living, And it's like the just transition on the net zero transition pathway. And you need to do a just transition when you're working with this carbon, offsets and how you're dealing with that. So yeah, I mean, it's a big topic, and we need to take everyone into consideration and look at not having negative impacts on people who were existing in areas that we just want to suddenly go and get carbon offsets from. So yeah, thank you for the question. It's a challenging question.
Absolutely. A just transition must be just. Absolutely. So I'm going to have to wrap up there because I can't believe that we are actually at the time. It's flown for me. Thank you all so much to our speakers and to our audience for tuning in today. We hope this discussion has helped you get a better understanding of how to connect the sustainability dots within your organization. So to that end, please don't forget to check out the new Sustainability Hub on charteredaccountantsworldwide.com. It's designed to assist you on the sustainability journey. It has many resources, and it has the roadmap that I had also mentioned as well. So we'll be back in the new year to continue the meeting the difference makers, to take a deep dive into subjects that affect us and our profession. If there is an idea that you would like us to consider for a webinar in the future, please do get in touch. In the meantime, thank you very much from me, and see you next time.